I built this insane fishing micro skiff for under $600 using a paddleboard from Costco and a jet drive motor from Temu. My obsession with building this budget fishing machine began when I was scrolling through social media and I kept seeing these amazing micro skiffs that are blowing up in popularity in the fishing world. But my jaw hit the floor when I saw the price of these. These micro skiffs start between $2,000 to $4,000, and that doesn't even include a motor. I realized I could never afford one of these amazing micro skiffs, especially with the price of food these days. But while I was out grocery shopping at Costco, I came across the most amazing thing. I saw an inflatable catamaran paddleboard that looked very similar to the micro skiffs I was seeing online, and it only cost $2.99, so I knew I had to buy this board and build a micro skiff out of it. So I threw it in the cart and I got to work. All right, back from Costco, and it was only $2.99. So I'm gonna open this thing up. Ooh. Oh, that's the air pump right there. Here is the bag. Oh, that is sick. Good looking zippers on it. It's got really nice pockets on the outside for extra storage. Oh, geez, beautiful paddles there. All right, let's unroll this thing out. Oh, look at that, beautiful. Oh, I love the smell of that new rubber. This is the electric air pump that the paddleboard came with. Really nice two-stage air pump, but you do have to plug it into DC power, like in a car or something, to run it. And you can see we're not right by the car right now. So I'm actually gonna power it off the rinse kit, which I also bought at Costco. This thing charges up, it's got a battery in it, and apparently it can be used as a power bank also. So we're gonna give this a shot and see if the rinse kit is able to run the air pump. So this is a two-stage air pump, and right now it's on the first stage, which is a high volume but lower pressure pump. You can hear that real noisy sound. That's the second stage of the air pump, and that's got more of an air compressor type pump, higher pressure, lower volume. So the air pump rushes in a lot of air quickly with the high volume, low pressure pump, and then it switches over to the second stage and really makes this thing high pressure, which makes it nice and hard and rigid. Huge W for Costco, W for Costco for selling this board for $2.99. Look at this thing. Doesn't this thing look absolutely beautiful? And let me flip this over and show you those pontoons. How cool are those pontoons right there? It definitely looks like it's gonna be floating on the pontoons, and you're gonna have the airspace underneath here. Two really nice fin boxes back in here. Oh, flip up fins, look at this. That is so nice, you guys. Okay, pretty neat. All right. So the fins snap back in like that and they just stay right on the board. So you're not gonna accidentally forget your fins at home, which I've done before. Oh yeah, solid as a rock. 15 PSI is a pretty high pressure for a paddleboard. So let's stand on it. If you jump on the pontoons, it's super solid. Although if you jump in the middle, you can feel a little bit of spring back and forth. I can feel the middle kind of bending in a little bit. But out here, the pontoons feel like they're made out of wood. I mean, they're just super solid. So far, it looks really good. Let's put this thing on the sawhorse and do the stand test. Now, I've got the sawhorses pushed about as wide as I can get them. The board's 10 foot from stem to stern. However, I can't get the sawhorses at the very tip, so I've got them probably 8 feet apart, still pretty wide. So I think this is gonna be a pretty good test for the strength of this board. Oh, how is it now? Is there any flex in it? Oh, now I can feel some flex, but it's not bad. Okay, let me stand right in the middle. Woo, yeah, okay. All right, not bad. Pretty strong. The board's really not giving. It's got a little bit of give to it, but not too bad. Overall, I'm very impressed with the build of this board. Super strong. Look at this box. It's got Chinese writing on it because it's from China. This is an outboard jet drive motor. It's an outboard jet drive gasoline motor meant for small boats. But we're gonna figure out a way to attach it onto the paddleboard here. So I got this from Temu for about $250. It says that it's a 4-horse. I'm gonna guess it's about 25 pounds. Oh, look at this thing, man. This is beautiful. What? This is crazy. Look at this little guy. Probably 25, 30 pounds. But overall light. I can see if I can curl it with one hand. Yeah, look at that. Looks like a little lawnmower engine on top here. Got the gasoline tank built right in the top, which is really cool. I don't need to bring an external gasoline tank. The motor stands up on its own. Here's the transom clamp here. So we're gonna rig something for this to attach to. Crank starter there. We've got a kill switch. We actually need to wire in a secondary kill switch onto the tiller arm here, because if I fall off the board, this thing is just gonna stay running and the board's just gonna go away from me, or it's gonna turn and come around and crash into me, which isn't good. But what's nice is it does have the jet drive, so you can see there's no exposed propeller. This is actually a pretty safe option for the paddleboard because it's not gonna cut me or anything if I fall into it. I can't, because the propeller is all enclosed within the jet, and this is the jet nozzle here. So really cool, neat little motor. We got to figure out a way to mount a piece of wood on the back of the board here, so that way our motor can go right here. Now this is adjustable up and down because we want to make sure that we get the nozzle in the right position. We want it to be just below the surface of the water. That's going to give us the most efficiency here, and get it nice and tight close in on the board like that. And then we'll be able to steer it here. This looks pretty good. And it is actually a 4-stroke, which is pretty exciting, which means no mixing oil or anything like that. So I think this is gonna go great on the back of this board. As far as stand-up paddleboards go, this board actually performed pretty well. It exceeded my expectations. I thought this was gonna be a slow board because of how heavy it is, but it cut through the water much faster than I expected. So I'm really happy with that. It paddles really nicely. It's obviously very stable because of how wide it is. And when the fins are down, the board tracks nice and straight. And even with the fins up, the board still tracks very straight, much straighter than any other paddleboard if you had removed a fin. So I think this is gonna be a really good candidate for our micro skiff. Now I did have to do a stability test on this and try and flip this over. You can see that I was throwing my weight side to side, and I even put all my weight on one foot, and I stood on the edge, the rail of the paddleboard, all the way on the edge, and I could not get the thing to flip. So I had to use the fin and kind of hook it and try and get it to flip over, and it just would not flip over. So this board is incredibly stable, and it's gonna make a great micro skiff. Taking an outboard jet drive motor that was designed for a boat and attaching it onto the back of a stand-up paddleboard took a little bit of creativity, but you can get a lot accomplished with 2x4s and zip ties. Now we are going to clean up this mounting system later and attach accessories like rod holders and a seat onto it, but I wanted to get the motor mounted on the board and test it in the water. The instructions were in Chinese, so it took us a minute to figure out how much oil the motor required, but we got it filled up with oil and gas and we tried to start it. Whoa. Is that supposed to lock down?
I don't know. Is there a little fuel valve?
Is there a primer? Oh, there's a primer.
Oh yeah, yeah. There you go. Now you're chucking it up back. Okay, there you go.
Okay, there we go.
Look at that. It's got a return line on it. It's pretty sweet, actually. Whoa! Woo! When you primed it away, it went.
Full after it primed.
Yeah, there you go. It's got a It's got like a neutral.
Right.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nice. Look at that thing, man. I had to play around and find the best mounting height for the motor. If the motor's too low into the water, it creates drag and reduces the top speed. If the jet is too high out of the water, then it begins to cavitate the impeller and you lose thrust. It seems to be the sweet spot is to have the jet of water exiting right at about the surface of the water that you're in. That seems to give us the most thrust and the best top speed. My body weight positioning definitely seemed to affect the performance of the jet drive. I wanted to keep my body weight near the center of the board, especially with that added 25 pounds of the engine all the way in the back of the board. I needed to get my body weight up front. So I made an extender out of a piece of hose and attached it to the tiller arm on the motor so I could control the motor more from the center of the board. This gave the board a nice ride. It made it really stable and it made it pretty easy to stand up and still feel very comfortable on the board. The cool thing about being able to stand up while you're running this paddleboard is the higher vantage point. You're able to look down and see what's down in the water. So if you're looking at the bottom, if you're looking for fish, if you're looking for reef, you're gonna be able to see it a lot better than if you were sitting down. So that's where this paddleboard setup definitely beats a kayak. When we add all our accessories onto the board, I am going to add a cooler that's going to double as a seat for long runs or for choppy water, you're definitely gonna get much more stability by sitting down than you would standing up, especially when it comes to turning. When it comes to turning, you gotta remember to kind of lean into the turns a little bit, just like you would on a surfboard when you're standing up. Otherwise, you could fall off. So I think for the long run, the seat on the cooler is gonna be the way to go. In the kneeling position, the board feels incredibly stable. It feels like it would take a lot to knock me off this board. Now on this day, there was a bit of light chop in the channel and the board cut through it like butter. Really felt comfortable. That pontoon design rides over the waves and the board stays very, very stable. I'm really impressed with how smooth this board actually rides, and it absorbs the shock of the waves, and it's a really, really nice ride. You don't get beat up at all. With the fins on the bottom of the board in the folded up position, you can actually run the board in about 6 to 8 inches of water. And also, because we have no exposed propeller, we can run this thing right across the sand flats, and if we get too low, the motor will just suck up a little bit of sand and lose thrust. One of the things I had to remember about a jet drive motor is the steering. With a jet drive, you need to give the motor throttle in order to steer it. If you let off the throttle and try to turn the motor, it will not turn the vessel at all. You need to apply throttle so that that water jet is thrusting either left or right, and that's what actually turns you. The top speed of the board is only about 5 miles an hour. It's not very fast, but it is fast enough to get me out to my fishing spots. It's also faster than the average speed I would paddle on a paddleboard or on a kayak, and I don't have to paddle. I just get to sit there and chill and look around while I operate the board. Now, if I did have an engine failure, I always could switch back over to the paddle and paddle it just like a regular paddleboard. The catamaran hull design on this board allows the board to maintain its width from front to back, which is incredible for a micro skiff. That's going to give me more deck space for coolers and fishing gear. So far, I'm thinking my micro skiff build is turning out to be a huge success. We just got done with our first water test out in the lagoon, and so far I'm really happy with the board and motor setup. However, we do have a couple of pretty serious issues that we need to fix. Now you can see I mounted the motor on a 2x4 transom frame. So I made a 2x4 transom frame and I made these skids that run up the side here. Then the skids attach on the front of the board. Because when you're giving throttle to the engine, it's gonna wanna make the skids go up like this. But because the skids are so long, we really don't need much force to hold them down. So I just attached this with zip ties. So 2 zip ties in the front, 1 zip tie in the back, and our engine bracket is very, very stable. It's not the prettiest. I'm gonna paint it because I do want it to match the vibe of the board. But what's another nice thing about having these big rails which run up the side of the board, it gives us spots to attach our accessories. So we are gonna attach some rod holders on here. We're gonna trick this thing out. We're gonna make it pretty nice. And the other thing that we really, really need to do as a matter of safety is put a kill switch lanyard on the motor here, because the throttle on this ratchets. So if this throttle is ratcheted up high and you fall off this board, this thing is just gone. It's just gonna take off without you. So we're gonna put a kill lanyard on there. So I did get this off Amazon. I think it was about $15. This is a kill switch with a lanyard. So this is gonna attach to my vest. So if I fall off in the water, this is gonna pull out the key switch and it's gonna shut off this engine here. Now, thankfully, China did give us a mounting hole right here on the bracket for this emergency kill switch, and it actually happens to be exactly the right size. So I think with a couple of connectors, we should be able to securely put on our kill switch. So what I have here is just a PVC plug. It's got a flat bottom. And yes, I do have a drill bit right over the board. That's my pilot bit. I don't need to go all the way through with it. I do have a nice thick 5/16 lag bolt here. That thing is gonna hold super tight. I'm gonna glue most of the rod holder together, but not all of it. So what that's gonna allow me to do is to swivel this. So this will be a swiveling rod holder. It'll all have just enough tension. And then when I'm done for the day, I will be able to just take it all out. That's got a really good bite to it. Perfect torque spec right there. Here's the rod holder. So this is gonna go right on here, and you will be able to swivel it so I can point it forward when I'm running. I can turn it out sideways like that when I'm trolling. There we go. Nice. See how our rods do? We got our regular spinning rod right here, our bait caster. I'm really happy with how the rod holders came out. So in this position, you can store the rods forward like that. It keeps the rods lower than pointing them straight up and down, which is great if I need to get under some trees or something. Then if I want to troll, I can actually turn them out like this. There's not too much resistance on them. I got them out like that. And then I got a nice wide spread so I can troll offshore for tuna or wahoo or whatever. Or I can just take it out and then cast from the deck and just, you know, fish normal like I would for bass or whatever. So we got a really good versatile setup on this and super cheap, just a couple dollars in PVC pipe and fittings, and we got some DIY rod holders. I do want to paint the rod holders, paint the wood, make this thing blend in and look really nice. But before I throw any paint on this, I want to take this out into a super shallow canal with a lot of weeds and do a really shallow water, dirty water test, see if the engine clogs up and see how it performs out in the real world. I found a very shallow canal that's not much bigger than a ditch to do our shallow water torture test of the skiff. There's about 5 to 6 inches of water, and below that is a real thick layer of silty mud. I had to first get the skiff down the bank. It was about 4 to 5 feet high and fairly steep, but it wasn't too hard to get the skiff down there and get the motor all set up. I really like the portability of the skiff. Now that I have the skiff, I can basically transport it in my car and take it anywhere, fish any canal, any pond. Nothing's off limits. I don't need a trailer. I don't need a truck to transport it. The motor and skiff cut through the water really well as long as you have about 6 inches of water. Once you get below 6 inches of water, the motor will start to suck up mud from the bottom and you will start to cavitate and lose thrust. And when that happened, I cut the throttle back to about 50%. And then I was actually able to still keep propulsion and keep moving the skiff forward. If I tried to accelerate it faster in that real shallow mud, it would pick up the mud and start to cavitate again. So in real shallow water, you have to find a sweet spot on the throttle, enough to keep you moving, but not enough to suck up the mud. I was amazed at how much mud and sand this motor was actually able to suck up and spit out and not be damaged by. Everything seemed to be okay after this test run. That seems to be the main advantage of the jet drive driven outboard instead of a propeller outboard. It's able to run in shallower water, and if you do hit the bottom, there's no propeller that's striking anything. It's a lot safer for marine life, safer for you if you fall in the water, and I think it's a pretty awesome combination for this board. So this little outboard is able to spin 360 degrees, and if you point it backwards and give it throttle, that will give you your reverse. But the problem is there was no locking pin on the motor. So I tried to put it in reverse and give it throttle, and the motor tipped over and it hit the deck. And when it did that, it actually shot gasoline out of the vented fuel cap. So that's a big safety hazard that the motor is able to tip over, and also that gasoline is able to spit out of it. I kind of spazzed out and dropped the camera in the water when that happens. So far, that's been the most serious safety risk of this motor that I've found yet. The fact that it leaks out gasoline if it tips over sideways, and also that there's no locking pin on it and it can flip up in reverse. But I think that has a lot to do with the way I have it mounted. Because I'm dealing with such a low transom mount, the motor is sitting up really high, and that makes it want to tip forward. So with those few issues aside, I would say that this micro skiff is awesome for shallow water. It's going to be great for getting out there to sandbars, mangroves, real shallow areas. And if you do hit the bottom, this thing just sucks up some sand and spits it right out. And if you're really that shallow that the motor can't operate, you can just get out and walk through it, because at that point you're in ankle deep water anyway. Now I had to take this ugly wooden motor bracket and trick it out, paint it, and make it match the board. So I had to round off all the edges and give it a good paint job. The micro skiff build out is complete, so I took it deep into Florida's saltwater backcountry to do some fishing and see how this thing stacks up against the more expensive micro skiffs. I've got the motor mounting bracket all painted and it looks really good. It really blends in with the board nicely. I picked up a really nice cooler for $80 from Walmart, which doubles as a seat and a dry box, so it's a really good addition to the micro skiff. And I've got the kill lanyard installed on the outboard motor, and it's attached to my vest, so if I were to fall off the board, it would immediately cut the throttle, so I'd be able to get back in and not lose my micro skiff. But one issue I have with this is the lanyard is actually too short, so it's constantly kind of pulling on me the whole time, and it's not ideal. I do need to extend the lanyard out a little bit longer, and then I think this kill lanyard setup will be perfect. The hose that I use to extend the tiller arm is working great. Seems to be a really good length. I'm able to sit on the cooler and keep my weight right in the middle of the board and just steer that motor like that, and it's actually very comfortable. The swiveling rod holders I made out of PVC pipe are working great. They have the perfect amount of tension on them, so it's easy to swing them in and out. I've got 2 of them holding the rods, and then I've got a 3rd one installed to hold a net, or in this case I'm using it to hold the selfie stick on my camera. Getting up from the cooler seat is really easy to do. You can get back there, open it up, and put your phone and all your dry goods in there. And I'm very confident that if that thing fell off and went to the water, it's going to float. It's not going to get any water into it. So a great place to store the valuables, and it makes a really nice seat. So having a cooler seat like this is a must on a micro skiff. I debated whether I should strap the cooler down or just tether it off with a lanyard. I think I'm just going to tether it off with a lanyard, because if I did flip the board, pop the board, sink the board, I do want the dry box to just float so I can just grab the box and swim it to shore, and I'll still have my phone, communications, all my valuables, emergency gear will be in that dry box, and it's not going to be stuck onto the board. So I think I'm just going to do a lanyard. And I gotta say, zipping through the backcountry on this micro skiff is a lot of fun already. For fishing, this micro skiff is awesome. I definitely like it better than fishing off a kayak. I love being able to stand up and sight fish, and that wide catamaran design makes the board really, really stable. And what's awesome is you can fish 360 on it too. You can turn around any direction. It's real easy to put the rod back in the rod holder and just grab the paddle and very, very quietly reposition this thing. So there's really no need for an electric trolling motor when you're able to paddle this quietly. And another thing that's really cool is if you bump that paddle against the paddleboard, really doesn't make much sound because it is an inflatable. The sound doesn't really travel into the water. So I think it's going to be great for sneaking up on fish. Now obviously once I get close to my fishing location, I'm going to switch over to the paddle so I can get in tight on my fishing spots and not spook the fish with the motor. But I haven't tested this yet, but I do think that the motor is probably a lot quieter than it seems underwater. That's because this motor, the exhaust lets out above water. It's not like many other outboard motors that put the exhaust out below water. So underwater should really only be the sound of the water moving through the jet. And again, I haven't tested this yet, but this motor may actually be quieter than it seems. This little Chinese jet drive motor has been really great so far. It's really exceeded my expectations. You can see it starts up first pull here once it's warmed up. Real easy to do, and I really haven't had any issues with the motor. So far it's been very reliable. I think that's because it's a 4-stroke lawnmower style engine, so this thing is just made to be run at full throttle all the time, and it's air cooled as well, so no matter what I do, if I suck up dirt or anything, there's no water pump to damage, so it should never have any overheating problems. I probably only put about 10 hours on the motor so far, but I am pretty confident in taking this thing far back into the backcountry. With this micro skiff, I'm able to get through some really tight squeezes, through some really shallow water to get really far back in to get those fish that other fishermen just can't get. Obviously, this thing can go where boats cannot go, and it can probably go where most other micro skiffs can't go as well because of the jet drive motor and the shallow draft on this board. And with the jet drive, I have much less fear of getting tangled up or striking debris in the water. And definitely this is much safer, especially in an area like this where there could be manatees around. A propeller strike can really injure a manatee, but with this jet drive, there's absolutely no way to injure marine life in the water. Because of the way the motor's mounted on the catamaran, the jet drive itself actually sits in the tunnel in between the 2 pontoons. So there's no part of the motor that's sticking lower than the board. If I were to run over a manatee or even a person, they're just going to bump into the inflatable paddleboard. That's why this micro skiff is the ultimate for getting through some real skinny water, getting through some real tight spaces, windy mangroves to get way back in there. I've got the rods sticking up. Now, they could get snagged in the mangroves. If I was going to go through some real tight spaces, I could take the rods out of their rod holders and put them on the bungees right on the deck, And then the highest part of this board would probably be myself or the motor. And the motor is very, very maneuverable. And if I had to, I always could switch over to the paddle. But this thing is so maneuverable that I can turn the motor sideways and I can spin 360 donuts right in place. And I'm spinning these donuts on the sandbar in probably about 8 inches of water. I don't know of any other boat or micro skiff that can do this. Obviously, there's no reason to do donuts while you're out fishing, but it just shows you how this thing can turn on a dime. And it is a pretty cool trick to show off to other people at the sandbar. And listen how quiet this thing can be when you're using the paddle and sneaking up on fish. But I do need to get a little bit better at very gently getting that paddle down and quietly getting my rods out. But again, this is an inflatable and not a hard fiberglass vessel, so I don't think any little bumps like that is going to transmit sound down into the water very much. This micro skiff is the ultimate budget fishing machine. First off, let's talk about how portable it is. You don't need a trailer and you don't need a truck to transport this thing because it's built on an inflatable paddleboard. When you're all done with it, you just deflate the paddleboard, roll it up, put it in the trunk of your car, along with the motor that only weighs 25 pounds. The cooler can go in the back seat of the car, and the wooden frame that the motor mounts on can go on the roof rack of the car. I was even thinking about putting some hinges on the wood so that it can fold up and fit inside of a car as well. So no truck, no trailer needed. You could roll up in a Toyota Camry and have this whole rig all set up within a matter of minutes. Then you've got yourself a super capable, super stable micro skiff that you can go out on the open water where all the boats go, and then you can get it back into the mangroves in the backcountry, get through those real tight passageways through that real skinny water, and just find yourself the coolest fishing spots that no one else has reached. What's your opinion? Is this micro skiff a piece of junk waste of time, or is this a good fishing skiff for only $600 when compared to other micro skiffs that cost $5,000 or more? And let me know what you would have done differently on a micro skiff like this. What accessories would you have installed and how would you have set it up? Please let me know in the comments below. I definitely want to make this micro skiff better and better, catch a ton of fish on it, and please let me know if there's any other DIY boat projects that you want to see me tackle.